All right. I didn't move fast enough. I didn't get there in place, but that's all right. We're going to make it work. Hey, welcome. Thank you guys so much for being here. You guys are awesome. This has been a really cool series that we've been able to do as we walk through different elements of the family. And today I'm going to talk about raising teenagers. Wanted to kind of let you know a little bit of who I am for those of you who may not know me. If you are watching online, if you're in here, my name is Josh Canarum, and I am the student pastor here at Valleydale. I have worked with this generation of students, or at least the student generation, for about 15 years, and it's been a great journey. It's been a lot of fun. It's also, been challenging because that's how this works, but it has been a joy and a privilege to invest in young people. And so today what I want to do is just introduce and talk about what does it look like to raise teenagers. And I want to start with this little aside, and that is, if you ever talk to somebody who is confident in how to raise a teenager correctly, there's a strong chance that they've never met a teenager, and there's a definite chance they've never lived with a teenager, okay? I think that's a really important caveat to start with, and just say, nobody who raises a teenager feels like an expert in it. Even if they've had 3 kids who go through it, there are always going to be things they wish they could have done or wish they would have known, and there's always been surprises along the way. My own kids, they're very different. I have 2 very different personalities. I thought I could practice with Isabel, and then Will would be fine, but now I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader, and Isabel's in 8th grade, Will is in 6th grade, and so we have entered the teenage years. So I come at this as a student pastor, also as a parent, and then also somebody who I really enjoy researching this generation. I really enjoy getting to know what makes these kids tick, how can we communicate the best, how can we reach them the best, and how can we equip parents to work with them. And so that's what brings us to our time today. What I thought would be really helpful, though, is just to make sure that we understand, while it's a difficult thing, raising a teenager isn't really supposed to be scary. There's a lot of people who are very scared of teenagers, and usually I hear that from people when I ask them to volunteer in the student ministry, and this look of terror comes over their face, and they're asking God if this is the punishment that was to come from their secret sin that they committed long ago, and that's a joke, but that's okay. We're going to get there. But no, it's like this idea, like, oh, well, that seems really hard. But let me just tell you, it really is a joy. And the students they get a kind of a bad rap. And one of the things I would like for us to do is to give you the opportunity to kind of understand a little bit about this generation. And so if you have teenagers in the room, you may see some of these characteristics that may help you understand them. If you are yet to have a teenager, I want you to understand this may be what you're looking forward to. If you've already had a teenager, one of the things I would tell you is that we seem to be in a season or in a mode of being where generations continue to be shorter and shorter, because change is coming so fast that the characteristics of one generation, while earlier generations might have been 40 years, now they're really kind of micro generations. And so what I want to talk about really are the kids born from the year 2000 till now, so about that 20-year period. And so these are just some characteristics, and I thought it would be helpful to start here. So in this generation, the first thing I would say is they have the most information and the least wisdom. They have so much information at their fingertips. They have an incredible amount of information. They can find out anything. There's nothing they can't know by Googling it or searching it. They see things. They experience things. They can figure out how to fix your dryer by watching YouTube. They can figure out, how to do a lot of things that they shouldn't do, via YouTube, all kinds of stuff. They just have all kinds of information. They've also seen a lot of things. They see things that they really aren't prepared to see, such as, violence. Even over this course of this year, they've seen video clips in the news of people dying. They've seen riots. They've heard things, and so they have so much information. I was really rattled by this one time because we did prayer requests, and we were going around the room, and it was a bunch of 6th grade boys, and 3 of them wanted to really highlight that they wanted to pray that North Korea didn't send a nuclear weapon at us, because they had seen it on the news. It was on their news alert on their phone, and suddenly they were really nervous. That was a genuine concern that they had. And you can imagine if you grew up at a time where there was, you were scared of the Russians, or you're concerned about other things, That it's kind of like that, but every week there's something new because there's always more information. They just see new stuff all the time. They get Amber Alerts on their phone, and so now they're confronted with the fact that people are kidnapped, and they have to process that. And so they have so much information. The problem is they don't always have the wisdom and the maturity to process that information, and that's where we as parents are going to come in just a few minutes. The second thing is this: they have the most opportunities. There are so many opportunities. There are so many specialized skills. There are so many things they can do. So they have the most opportunities, but I would also say that they're also easily the most stressed and anxious generation in society. A recent study came out. It said over 25% of adolescents over the course of this pandemic have considered suicide. They've at least thought about it or processed or it entered into their minds. They're incredibly anxious. They're incredibly worried about things. And they're incredibly stressed because, let's just be honest, everything is year-round now. It's amazing to me how all of the activities that they can participate have become not just seasonal, but really year-round. And so show choir, band, baseball, basketball, FBLA, FFA, you name it, it's a year-round thing. You're either fundraising, you're practicing, you're getting ready for it, you're going places. Everything is year-round, and their schedule is pretty much full. Not only that, but recent changes in education have increased homework levels, and so some kids have 3-4 hours of homework. It's very common here for 11th graders to disappear for about a year on Wednesday nights because they actually have that much homework. They'll start at 5 and end at 10, and that's very common for a lot of our students in the advanced classes. It's just a lot of work. There's a ton to do. And so they're stressed, they're incredibly anxious, and their schedules are very full. And let's note, that also means that you as parents, your schedule is also very full. They're also the most connected, but they're also the loneliest. You see how the dichotomies really become very confusing. They're most connected. When you went home from school, you stopped talking to your friends and you were stuck talking to your parents, or at least shutting yourself in your room. These kids, their relationships and their connections never stop. It's 24/7. In fact, it advances. This is particularly seen in dating, where at the end of school you don't see your girlfriend anymore, but now your relationship continues on forever. It continues. You text, you can FaceTime, you can talk the rest of the day. You never get that disconnect, and so you're always connected, and yet, because you're always connected, you can always see how other people are enjoying themselves and you're not a part of it. And it's a debilitating thing for so many kids to see, I didn't get invited to this party, or I didn't get to go here, or these kids get to do this and I don't get to go. And so that loneliness begins to creep in because technology and just the pace of life have led to pretty shallow connections and not a lot of depth because you've got to do everything for the Instagram. So they're the most connected, they're the loneliest. The next thing would be they're the least churched, but they have the most individualized faiths. They're the most unchurched, they're the least churched or most unchurched because, and I know this because what happens now when we have guests who come to our church, I know not to say, hey, turn to the book of John, or turn to John, or you guys know this story in Moses, because they really don't. I remember sitting in a life group a couple of years ago, or maybe just a year ago, and I asked them to turn to John, and one of the students, and he was being completely serious, didn't know who John was, and I explained it was in the Bible, and he's like, I've never had one of these. And he's a kid raised in the Bible Belt, never had a Bible, never seen a Bible, never introduced to it, didn't know how he would turn to John, didn't know what page. And so what we've had to do is change. We have to define all of these words. We have to define all of these key concepts. We have to explain what we're talking about. We can't assume any prior biblical knowledge because a lot of the kids in this generation simply don't have it. But what they do have are these kind of syncretic faiths where they have added some elements and combined some things where this sounds good, so this is true, but this is opposite of that, but also we want it to be true, so this can be true. And so what happens is you begin to have a lot of individualized faiths because this generation has very limited belief in institutions. They've watched institutions fail, whether it's financial because they came up kind of born in the middle of the financial collapse. They've seen the problems of institutions. They're very familiar with the fact that there are a lot of churches who have failed or pastors who have failed, so they're leery of religion. They're just leery of school because it's hard and it's frustrating. and institutions don't work very well for them, so they can build their own, and they build their own faith. So some of our role as a student pastor is to help deconstruct a little bit of what they're coming to, or at least help them find some consistency in their beliefs, and then build on that foundation. They're also the most creative. I don't want this to all sound negative, because it's an incredible group, and they're incredibly creative, incredibly entrepreneurial. We have a kid who is a part of our student ministry who we went to camp, and it turned out he is a TikTok star. And we had girls who from all over the country at this camp, and they were coming to talk to him. And then later on at night, he was explaining how much money he had made that day. And I was like, how do you make money? And they're like, they just Venmo it to me, because they just sponsor TikTok stars. And I was like, well, that's cool. What did you make? It was only $440 today. This is a seventh grade student who it just makes videos of dancing, okay? So you're talking about making like $400 a day for just putting up 10-second videos. Incredibly creative. I apparently didn't have what it takes. My videos didn't get any. I'm just kidding. But I'm thinking about it. But get a new dryer, all those adult buys. So they're most creative, but they're also really restless. They jump around. There's so many options. There's so many different things. Also, things change. TikTok wasn't even a thing 3 years ago. Now it is. Instagram is starting to drop down, mostly because you parents are on there. And so now they're on TikTok, and then soon they'll be on something else. It shifts. It changes. The change is completely, it's really wild. You think about Redbox. I don't know. I'm lamenting right now that Redbox is not a thing anymore. You guys might go, but apparently nobody goes to Redbox. And so that was amazing like 5 years ago, and now it's just like, well, what's the point of Redbox when you could just stream it on your phone and then project it with, all that. And so that's great. And then the last thing is they're the most nurtured and the least prepared. And this is where we kind of come into it. And so not to get too critical here, but they are incredibly nurtured. And we're going to talk about what that has looked like. But they're also the least prepared for life. Adolescence now extends up through about age 26 or 27. Marriage is pushed into the 30s. Having kids also, obviously, well, sometimes not, and sometimes is pushed that far as well. And like jobs, first careers, all of that is just pushed because kids are living at home longer. They're expecting to stay with mom and dad, and adolescence, that mentality is extending way beyond college, way beyond high school, and it's just become a thing. So because they've always been nurtured and they don't really know how to exist on their own, and they're worried, and parents aren't really thrilled for them to do it because they would rather keep them in the house anyway, even if they don't really think that. And so that raises the question, like, what are the paths that are most often taken? So I want to kind of evaluate parenting styles that have taken place over the last maybe 10 years. And so the first one I would say is called, what I call it, hands-free parenting. Hands-free parenting means I looked at the scene, it seemed really hard, and I'm just going to let things happen the way it goes. These phrases like boys will be boys, or, they're going to do it anyway, or I'm honestly just too tired. Those are all very honest answers about the hands-free parent. You see that, truthfully, if I'm just going to be really honest with you, what I like to call those children, I call them Mowglis. From the Jungle Book, Mowgli was raised in the jungle and just took care of himself. And so I call that, if I see a kid who seems to have no boundaries and can't be told no and doesn't seem to have ever heard of a rule, I'm just like, we got a Mowgli on our hands. We're going to have to figure this out. So you have hands-free parents. Then you have, the second one would be the snowplow parent. Tim Elmore, who's an author I love because he studies this generation really well, he calls it the snowplow parent. He may not have originated it, but the snowplow parent basically clears the path and makes everything easy for the kid. They're the kids who are calling, they're the parents who are calling my mom, who's a college professor at Sanford, and saying, my daughter has always gotten A's, and you gave her a B, and I'm going to need you to change it, or I'm going to call the provost. There's a story in Tim Elmore's book about a mother who called the president of a university and said, I saw that it's going to be below freezing today, and I'm not sure my kid's going to know to wear a coat. Can you call down or have the RA make sure he's wearing a coat when he leaves the dorm? And that's a real college in Georgia. Like, that's the kind of that snowplow parent who wants everything for their kid to be easy. It's the parent who, bribes the coach to get him on the team, who fights really hard, even the kid's not qualified, to get into different things. The snowplow parent, it's probably the predominant parenting style right now. There's always a pendulum. You had in the 80s, maybe you had parents who were busy because the economy was good and everybody was working, and they were very dismissive. It's the Home Alone era where they didn't even know they didn't take their kid. And then you swing back and it's like overly emphasized, and that's where we got the everybody gets a trophy thing. And now it's kind of swung back to everybody is a trophy and everybody's perfect and my kid can't do wrong. And so I think that's where we're at now. And I don't know where it's going to swing after that. There's a third parent. I'm going to call him the Bobby Knight parent. If you don't get that reference, Bobby Knight was a coach of Indiana basketball who threw chairs at his kids and referees. And so he just was an angry coach. It's that old school football coach. You can think about the coach who just yells and yells. And this is the kind of parent who the kid cannot do anything right. And you're always on him. It's like you got a 99, but you didn't get 100. You tried really hard, but you didn't try hard enough. Your friends aren't good enough. Your school isn't good enough. You're just not good enough. And it's the parent who's always looking to critique and to peck and they mean well. They mean well because they think that will help them see their deficiency and grow through it, but really probably just crushing their soul and not allowing them to grow or ever feel good about themselves, if we're really honest. And so I don't think anybody is necessarily exactly this parent. There are a few people who do these things, but all of us maybe mix this in different seasons, and so we have to be careful and we have to be conscious of what we're doing. What I believe is most parents are motivated by the question, what is going to make my child the happiest? What is going to bring the most happiness to my child? And what we believe, and the narrative that we're telling ourselves there, is that if my child is happy, I have done a good job. The narrative is also that my job as a parent is to sacrifice anything I can in order for my child to be happy. Now, the problems with that is we don't necessarily define happiness. We don't necessarily understand that our own happiness or our unhappiness will affect the happiness of the child. And if we were to sacrifice everything we do for ourselves, we're actually creating a pretty bad example for our kid, because they are watching this and they think that you're always supposed to sacrifice your well-being for the well-being of someone's, not just life or well-being, but their happiness. And so I want to talk about that because there is a way forward that I think the research all seems to suggest. There's a way forward that I think is just very biblical, and a way forward that I think is much easier than trying to keep a 14-year-old or a 17-year-old happy. Because what makes them happy right now isn't going to be what makes them happy in 10 minutes. And so here's what I would say. I think there is a bigger purpose. I think you can find this in Scripture. You have Romans 12:2, where he talks about, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And I do think that we're not called to help our kid be conformed to the world, but to go outside of it. Now, what happens is we see that in maybe the wrong things they do. We don't want them to drink. We don't want them to do these things. But what we don't realize is conforming to the world also can be their value system, their virtues, their hopes, their dreams, what they pin their desires on. And so we are conforming to the world if we're teaching them that a good job that makes a lot of money is what is fulfilling and contentment. Because I have a lot of friends, I'm at age 40 now, and I have a lot of friends who've now hit that point in their life where they're like, this job really isn't what I want to keep doing. It just keeps paying though, and I'm kind of stuck. And that's not great. Now, their parents probably prepared them and they got the job and it paid and they wanted to do it. And they were ready, and now they realize it just wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't ultimately what they wish they had done, and you can't go back in time, not yet at least, maybe later. And so what's the answer? Here's what I would say. I do think the answer is this, first, focusing on developing values and priorities in your child, developing virtues. Instead of focusing on achievement, instead of focusing on what they're not doing or what they are doing, instead focus on who they are becoming. And this sounds really simple, but that's not how we're wired, and it's certainly not culturally how we are, because when you think about it, I don't know how many of you have kids in school, but you probably have access, like we do in our home, how to check their grades all the time. And so that's a bizarre occurrence now that you can Just pull up their grades at any point, and you can see and measure how your kid's doing. And so that is a great way to measure their academic achievement, but that may not be the end-all in how they're growing and how they're becoming a person. And I think we sometimes distill it down, and we think if they're good at sports, they're going to be fine. If they're good at math, they're going to be fine. But ultimately, if they're good at having a Christ-like character, that is where they're going to find true contentment and true joy. And so we have to be really careful about what we focus on. David Brooks has, he's an author, a New York Times columnist. He has a book called, I can't remember, it doesn't matter, but he compares resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And it's The Road to Character is the book. And so up here you'll see those, and what they are is he compares them. They're resume virtues, the virtues that we want to build for a strong resume, to be impressive, to be very worldly and aware. And then there are also eulogy virtues, the virtues that we hope people would say about us when we die, and they're very different. You can see how they're kind of the opposite here. Worldly versus humble. Ambitious versus doing good and being good. Mastery of the external world versus mastery of your internal world. You build, create, and innovate on the resume side. You honor others in the eulogy virtue. You savor accomplishment on the resume side, but you savor inner consistency and strength. You conquer the world in one, and you hear a calling in the other. And so you understand that those are pretty different. Now, this is really important because what I want you to understand is that we're not just trying to raise good kids. We're not trying to raise nice kids or moral kids. That is actually setting the bar a little too low. And I think this is where a lot of our parents and a lot of people got kind of stuck. It's actually, there's a term that was coined, it's called moralistic therapeutic deism. It's where we believe in this God, and we believe that God wants us to be good and that God can make us good and moral. And so God becomes a tool or an end for us so that we might become good. And we want that for our children. We want them to be good, and so God wants you to obey, and so you need to obey. Well, there's a lot of problems with that. We don't have time to go into that. But what we can say is this: if your kid is just good, it doesn't really matter, and it's probably not very long lasting. What is lasting is when we raise kids and their hopes and their dreams and their wisdom and their morality is born out of a theological foundation. And when they understand that the virtues come out of a relationship with God and out of a biblical understanding of the world, and that's where they become foundational, and that's what you can build on. What I mean by that is when you emphasize that wisdom is godly, so not just being wise, but godly wisdom. When you emphasize spiritual emotional health, when you push dependence upon God, spiritual contentment rather than contentment because you have the newest things. When you talk about not just a purpose for your life, but a God-given purpose. And you understand as Christians, the foundation for everything that we do is always there. It's not an element of our life, but it is the thing that we live out of. And so the values and the virtues and the parenting that we do has to come out of that theological framework. It doesn't come out of just pragmatism where if you're good, you'll get, people will be nicer to you. It comes out because if you're good, you reflect the character of your good Heavenly Father, and you're becoming more like Jesus. And by using that theological language, you give them a kind of an anchor to hold on to and a why, because if there's anything this generation wants to know, it's why you would tell me to do anything that you're telling me to do. I think that's where I should get thrown into it too, because I'm the same way. 2 Peter 1, 5-7 says this: "For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love." Galatians 5:22 and 23 reminds us that the Holy Spirit does this work in each of us. It brings love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and it reminds us there is no law against those kinds of things. The whole book of Proverbs reminds us that our calling is simply to honor God. The book of Ecclesiastes, which is very depressing and maybe not for teenagers, because it makes them think, oh, my grades, school doesn't matter, nothing matters, I'm just going to do my thing. The book of Ecclesiastes reminds us that ultimately everything that we do in the name of following and obeying and honoring God is what matters, and everything else eventually falls to the wayside. The Bible is very clear on these internal virtues, but let's be honest, it's very countercultural, because peer pressure is not just a teenager thing, it's a parent thing too, right? There is a benefit when your kid is the best basketball player on the floor, or when your kid has the highest grades in the class, or when they're winning awards. It makes them feel good, but it might make you feel just as good. And it's not because we don't want other parents to succeed, but it's because we just take pride in that. And for us to say, well, you know what, it's okay. My kid's just going to make the C, but that's okay because we're not going to do homework after 8 o'clock because for their well-being, they need this much sleep, and it's just going to be the way it is. That's our priority. Other parents are going to look at you like you're crazy. You're like, well, how will you ever go to college? And then you'll remember that it doesn't really matter. You just need to move to Tennessee where college is free. So let me just say this. If we're going to make developing virtues an important thing, so if you're going to make developing virtues our focus, let me suggest just a few that are going to be a starting point for you. I think humility, talking to your kids about humility. The students struggle with humility. They have a lot of false humility. They have a lot of pride. That pride is actually insecurity. You also have this emphasizing faith. Faith is an incredibly important element for you. If they don't see that faith, by the way, let me just give you a little nugget here. Your kid's faith will never rise above the faith you demonstrate. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to sit there and think, well, you don't take it very seriously, this whole idea that the world is created for this purpose and that there's a Savior who changes your life. Your life doesn't look changed. Their life's not going to be changed. So little nugget there. Your kids will never take their faith more seriously than you without some kind of external occurrence that happens. And I'd rather not. I would rather you be the driver and nothing else. Resilience. Our kids are not resilient. They think everything needs to happen for them. They love justice, but they don't do well when there's injustice. Kindness and integrity, those things are things we should be pushing to our kids towards theologically and talking about in their home. So that's step one. Let's talk about how. How? Meet as a family and decide what's important. So just some really practical how. Meet as a family. Sit there and talk about it. What do you want our home values to be? What do you think are the values that our home should push? What are the Canerum family values, or integrity, or whatever they might? We don't have them. We're going to do it. I just wrote it, so I didn't know. But meet as a family, decide what's most important, sit down, talk about it, figure it out, and then start talking about it. Put it on the wall. Begin to find ways to demonstrate it. And so figure out what that is. Do an inventory. This is hard for parents, but it is helpful if you want to get a baseline of where your kid is. Just tell people they can be completely honest with you and say, when you see my child, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do they do these traits? Now, you won't be friends with those people anymore, but there's a lot of people in the world, and you'll also have a really good understanding of your child. You see, you don't know your child. Most of you have no idea. I could give you some insight, but I won't because I like this job, and I don't want to not do it. And so you've got to be really honest. You've got to be honest with yourself. Ask your teachers, ask other people, ask adults, maybe even ask other kids. They're not reliable, but you can try it and just begin to see those virtues, figure out where you are, and then begin habits of where you can get to where you would like to grow in that. And so habits are really what's going to become that. Habits and conversation. Without habits and conversation, you're not going to get to that point. And so that's the how. You begin to change the language of success would be the last thing I would say. Your kids want your approval, 100%, and they know how to get it. Now, they may not know how to get it and achieve it, but they know the process to get it. They may not be able to make 100 in math, but they know that is what would make you the happiest. So they know, and they want your approval, and so begin to change the language of success. Success is not getting straight A's. Success is being the kindest person. It's not being the best athlete out there. It's being the best leader of the team, or it's being the person who helps other people who are not as good become better and coaches and encourages and doesn't lose patience with those who they're out there. Those are the things we celebrate ultimately, but they're the harder things to celebrate, right? Like a score is easier because you have a score. Character is harder to know and harder to negotiate. I want to offer you a few resources. While I'm doing that, I'm going to invite our panelists to come up. Our panelists I'll introduce in just a few minutes, but they're going to come up. And I want to introduce you to a few resources. Number one, the book of Proverbs. I actually think that everybody should just read a chapter of Proverbs a day. The Bible, and it's by God. That was supposed to be italicized so you would know it's an author. But Proverbs, the Bible by God, the Proverbs will gear so much of your parenting. Wisdom is such an important value in your home, and so I think pulling that into your home is so important as soon as possible. Generation Z Unfiltered, if you want to understand more how this generation ticks, this is a great book. Tim Elmore, he works out of Atlanta. He writes a number of books, a number of resources, a really, really great guy. A book called Meet Generation Z, James Emery White. It's a good book. It's a Christian perspective. He's a little more fearful than I think we maybe need to be about the generation. It's a little more doomsday-ish, but it mix it with Tim and you'll have more hope because he's very optimistic. And then Teach Your Children Well by Madeline Levine. This isn't a Christian book, but it was incredibly convicting as I read it. It talks all about how we've got to stop valuing achievement and start valuing virtue. What's interesting is we have it coming from the Christian side. We also have this whole understanding of value and virtue coming from just researchers who are, she's a San Francisco psychologist and sociologist. And so you have these people coming to the same conclusion because our kids are struggling with our achievement culture. And then Faith for Exiles. It's a little bit of a deeper read, but Faith for Exiles will help you understand how to communicate faith to your child in this generation. It's an amazing, but honestly, it's changed the way we've approached student ministry even just in the last 8 months because it's very clear that what we need to do is different. And so those are some great books. They come highly recommended, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about them. So we have a panel now, and so we're going to switch into panel mode, and we're okay on time. I went only 8 minutes over. So the panel, this is, let me introduce the panel. This is Jen. This is my wife, so she was easy to get for the panel. But Jen is also a counselor here at Valleydale. She counsels with our women and also counsels with a number of our teenagers in the community and in the church. And then Miss Jen Key is a parent. I've spent a lot of evenings at Jim, this is her husband, Jim's house, leading a D group and just watching them parent well, and thought they would be a great example of people who are right in the middle of it. Remind me of your kids' ages. I sort of know, but I'm not going to guess.
Well, we have a son, Alex. He's at Auburn. He's a sophomore at Auburn, so he's almost 20 years old. And Chandler, who is a senior at Briarwood, so he's 17. And Mackenzie is a freshman at Briarwood, and she's 15.
All right. So you've completed the middle school years. Congratulations.
We did.
Somehow.
It was a journey. Well, Jen, Jen Canarum. I should have had different people's names. Jen Canarum. Yeah, it doesn't work. Let me just ask you this question. As a counselor, what are some of the insights, as you counsel with teenagers, what are some of the insights that you have gained as far as parenting is concerned?
Yeah, so really in the past couple of years, I've been able to counsel a lot of teenagers, college students, even young adults, and have learned just a lot about them and seen kind of different themes that they've talked about. And just how different things have affected them. One of the, probably the most obvious that I would say is just the need for parents to really push how, just that the kids are loved unconditionally. And I know that you know that you love your kids unconditionally, and you probably assume that your kids do. But they live in a very conditional world. If they wear the certain things, they look a certain way, they make a certain grade, they make a certain team, then they have friends, or they have this success, or somebody likes them more. And that becomes, that affects them in a lot of ways. And they just kind of feel like they have to earn their worth, and they have to do certain things to be good enough. And so for us to remind them over and over that they are loved unconditionally by God in ways that they can't even begin to understand, and by us, that there is nothing that they have to do to earn that love, and that when they make mistakes, they're going to, and yes, there may be consequences, but it doesn't mean that we love them any less. And so just to kind of reiterate that over and over, it's obvious to you, but to make sure it's obvious to them. That, and just to listen to them. I know that when we think of teenagers, we think of kids that want to be maybe away from their parents and not talk to you and be in their room by themselves. And yes, they do want probably more independence and privacy. So even more when they do come to you and want to talk, make that so important. Give that time. And you may not care what they're talking about, but that doesn't matter because you care about them. It may not seem interesting to you, but it's fine. You listen because you care about your kids. It may not seem like a big deal to you, but it doesn't matter because it is a big deal to them. And a lot of times, I know I fall into this, but sometimes they just want to talk. They don't want you to fix it. They don't want your opinion. They don't want you to criticize their friends that they're telling this story about. They just want to vent. They want your empathy. They want you to validate the fact that it is really hard to be a teenager. And they just want to know that they can come to you and talk to you and that you care about them.
It's great, yeah. I see that. One of the coolest things I think about being a student pastor, everybody assumes that it's just going to be hard. The easiest way to get kids to like you is not to look cool, which is why I stopped trying, but it's to genuinely just show interest in them, and they're hooked. If you just talk to them, if you really care, if you're like, hey, I saw you made that team, they're like, but you would take the time to figure out that why would you care? And they often ask, why would you care? And you just say, because you're awesome, and we want to make sure that we're shepherding you well. And so it's a great thing. So other Jen Key, let me ask you this question. Now, you can be other Jen because we have humility as one of our new values in our home.
We haven't had a meeting yet.
Yeah, we will. So I would just ask you, what were some of the surprises that you discovered as your kids entered the teenage years? What maybe were you not expecting in those years?
Well, a lot of things, but Jim and I were talking about this just today. One of the things that I didn't expect is that teenagers like to talk, kind of piggybacking on what Jen said, like to talk really late at night.
Always.
I don't know what it is, but 10:30 comes around and they've already gone up to bed and they'll trickle back down. I don't know if they've finally slowed down enough to where the Lord is speaking to them, or maybe they've started thinking about something that happened at school or something that they're battling or worrying about or whatever, but they'll come back down, and everything inside you, as I'm snuggled in my bed, I'm thinking, oh, I'm ready to go to bed. Why, Lord? Why now? I've had all this time today that I could have addressed this or counseled or talked about this or helped him or her out, but really just to have them make the time for them because they're ready to talk, and when they're ready to talk, you got to be available. I mean, you got to be available.
For 2 hours, usually.
Usually, yes.
About midnight.
You have a lot more patience than us.
But I will say, because I check up on my kids texting, and a couple of nights after we had a big discussion and been counseling, basically, wearing our counseling hat, and stayed up really late, this particular child of ours had the next day texted a friend and said, hey, sorry I didn't get back with you. I was in a deep discussion with my parents. And the friend was like, oh, sorry, Godspeed. I hope that went well. And he said, I feel actually really wise. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, it shocked me. I was like, he listened and he knows what we're doing. So anyway, so that's very shocking. They want to talk really late at night, so you got to be ready.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah. We call that filibustering sometimes. I'm like, you just don't want to go to bed. This is a filibuster, and I do not want to talk anymore.
I just start falling asleep on them.
Well, that's good. I
It's
usually
like,
just hit play on the Hallmark movie I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to.
It's like, we've been here an hour and a half. I'm tired. I've got to go to bed.
Yeah, that's good. Well, one of the things I love about you guys as a couple is that you have intentionally designed your home to be the hub, like the hangout. What have been some of the benefits or even like the rationale of becoming the place where kids come and hang out and just it's the center?
Yeah. So early on, we had a couple that basically said, you want to be the house where all the other kids want to go. And so we really took that to heart and said, okay, what can we do to make this attractive to other kids and, be the place? And so we really did design, as you know, our downstairs just to be kind of a fun zone. And, we have a ton of kids, the church kids and, kids from school. we're just all the time hosting stuff, and we make it available, and there's pretty much not a time when our kids say, hey, can, so-and-so come over, can they come? We just make it an inviting place, and that was some great counsel that we got early, before we even had kids. Just make your place the place that all the other kids want to hang out, and and I love it. I as you know, I participate most of the time, so I enjoy that kind of stuff, and so does Jennifer. So we enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes you don't even know people are at your house.
No, you
and
don't.
You just
you really
you just
don't.
discover it when you see them
they-
walking by. That's great.
Yeah, I see them coming out of the garage, and I'm like, I didn't even know that child was here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. We used to have students call us and they would say, hey, can we come over tonight? And then just students from here, and I would be like, yeah, sure. What time are you thinking? Like, well, we're at your front door. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I have to go put clothes on, and then I will let you in. So that'll be great. And so, yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great to be the hub. It's great to be a place where they come. You get to know their friends.
You just have to have a budget for all the things that they tear up, because they
Yeah.
tear everything
Oh, I'm
up.
pretty
Oh,
sure.
you gotta
They-
have food.
And they
Oh,
eat a
and
lot
food.
You gotta
of
have
food.
food.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, she's done a great job with that, because every time they come over, not that we cook, but there's food,
There's a lot of food.
and they will eat everything we have.
Yeah. I gained a lot of weight because of D group. But that's okay. Well, Jen Canarum, let me ask you this question. What has this stage been like? So the stage of middle school is where we are. And so compare that. So we have people from, we've got preschool parents, and they maybe just are curious, what is that stage going to look like? Could you tell me a few of the things that are different in this stage compared to prior stages of child's?
Yes. The funny thing is that my first thought is that they stay up a lot later, and I really miss going to sleep. So I don't know why bedtime has become the topic, but they can put themselves to sleep, which is great. They just don't want to go to sleep. So I do miss that. But really and truly, when my kids were little, I would just, I would think, oh, there's going to be a day where they can do this by themselves, and they can sit at a table by themselves and eat, and all of these things are going to be easier. And those things are great. Like they're just way more self-sufficient. And
Will can make himself a quesadilla.
yeah, I mean, that's
a big
life-changing.
day.
We can leave them at the house, and it's going to be there when we come back. Like, all of that is amazing. And so there are a lot of things that are easier. I think I wasn't prepared for the things that are harder are just so much harder. Like everything kind of seems to be a bigger deal. I worried about whether or not they were eating the right thing, or if they could walk at the right time or something. And those things seemed huge, and they were at the time. But now I'm like, are they making the right friends? Are they learning this too much? Is this technology? Like everything seems to have a bigger
Consequence.
yes,
Yeah.
consequence. And so, it's like every stage. There's benefits, and there's things that are harder, and you have to try and focus more on the things about the stage that are easier, or you get real overwhelmed.
That's great. Yeah, that's very true. Well, what I'd like to do, if we're going to give this a shot, what I would love to do is see if you guys have any questions that we or I can address. I didn't prepare you for this part, so I'm happy to jump in there. But any questions, any clarifications from you guys who are out in the audience that might be helpful? Nobody ever wants to be the first question asker.
I'll share a verse that I wanted to share tonight. This is a verse I've kind of clung to whenever we have discussions at our house about, because there's always comparisons. Well, so-and-so is getting to go watch this movie, and Jim and I decided, that's not something we want our kids to go see, and all of it. Why? Why are their parents letting them go see it, and why are y'all not letting us? And just all the comparisons that as you go through the teenage years, your kids are going to look around and see everybody else doing certain things, and maybe you've decided with your spouse that you're not going to allow them to do that. So this verse is in 1 Corinthians, it's 10:23. It says, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. And this is a verse we have to use all the time with our kids because, you know, sometimes, most of the time, you're swimming upstream with your parenting because the way you're doing things are not the way the world is doing things. And your kids are like, well, wait a second, it's rated PG-13. I'm over 13. And, you know, you have to go back to, well, okay, who set up the ratings? Who are they?
Yeah, those 80s
You know?
were really bad at
Yeah,
ratings.
I mean, you know, you have to think, like, just because the world has said this is fine for you does not necessarily mean that it's edifying or that it's profitable for you. So I would just say that is a good verse to go to when your teenagers, which they will, start comparing your parenting to everybody else's and what other kids get to do versus what you get to do.
That's good. It's definitely a thing that happens a lot. So one of the questions that I get a lot is how do you manage technology? And we do actually a whole technology night for our parents of our students, and everybody leaves really sad and defeated. And that's just kind of how it works every time. And I try to make it as positive as I can, and then they always leave sad and defeated. But technology is there. There are certain things that are just going to be there. And so one of the conclusions I have come to, again, as we talk about virtues and values, is building a wall is not going to work in today's society. You're not going to be able to avoid these things. You know, I wasn't supposed to listen to the radio when I was a kid, and so I was supposed to drive places but not turn the radio on because it might be bad, or, you know, but now, like, everything is just at your fingertips, and if it's not their fingertips, it's at their friends' fingertips, and so it's not that hard to have access to anything. And so that's where, instead of building walls, which aren't going to work, the key really is to begin helping kids manage those situations before they happen, to develop those virtues, you know, to help them understand their standards, help them understand the why behind the rules of your home. We were just talking recently about if kids understand the why, if we would have understood the why and the wisdom behind it and say it's not morally wrong, and it's just not wise, and it's not helpful, that is way more beneficial than pretending like certain things don't exist or that they'll never be a problem. And I think it's an encouragement to us. And with technology, with really anything, with dating, with all of that, is helping kids grow into those virtues and values before they enter those situations so that they operate out of those values rather than having to do crisis management and try to figure everything out while they're in the middle of all of that. And so I would encourage you, again, as you guys develop these values and these virtues, and as you think about the character of your child, think about the specific applications of that. You know, whether it is technology, whether it is dating, whether it is, you know, the movies they watch or the music they listen to, and all of those things, because hopefully your children will live a different life than a lot of their peers. And it will be helpful for them to know why that is. And it's hard to be the good kid, to be honest with you. I mean, I grew up as a pastor's kid. Everybody knew I was a good kid. Fortunately, they just didn't think I'd be interested in a lot of things they did. So I wasn't faced with a lot of temptations because I just was not there. And my parents really liked me to be home on Fridays anyway, so it wouldn't have been an option. But you know, a lot of TGIF. There's a golden day of Urkel and all of that. But, you know, it was hard, but I kind of knew that my life was going to be different. And I think we do need to be honest with our kids. Like, look, you're in a Christian home, and your life is going to be different. You're not going to do as many things, but you're also going to experience things that are really healthy for you, that are good for you. We're going to, you know, you're missing out, but you're really dodging things, and they won't see it that way. But there are differences in that. So,
well, and it goes back to what you said about just shaping their worldview.
yeah,
I mean, every decision you make like that is shaping that worldview and pushing it towards a theological worldview where that's not what they get at school. That's not what they get out in the world. And, you know, every one of those decisions is a big decision that impacts them. And, you know, we've had one leave and, you know, has started college. And I mean, that's a whole different world. You have released them out into the world, and you don't know if you've done a good job or a bad job, and until they kind of come back and you start having conversations with them, then you realize, man, they really do get more than what you give them credit for a lot of times, especially if you try to use every moment as a teaching moment, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do.
That's true, but it's good. One of the things I would tell you too on that is, if you want your child to take their faith seriously, it's so important that they understand that it's a big deal. You know, the kids these days can see fake a mile away, you know, and they have an incredible radar. They're lied to all day long. You'll be happy if you do this, but you'll be happy if you do the opposite. You'll be, you know, they just, everything's trying to sell them things. They're the market audience because they control the economy, so everybody goes at them. They don't control the economy, but you pay for their stuff. And then, you know, that's how it works. But if faith doesn't seem to be something that's transformational and something that's deep and something that really is worthwhile pursuing, then it's going to get left on the wayside. And that's the fear I have, you know, when it's an element of your family and not the foundation of your family, it's really easy to shake off an element of your family because there's so many other elements to add on. And so I just would give that last encouragement to make sure that your kids know that your faith is the foundation, and demonstrate that in your speech and your communications and your time management, and value that in a big way. So I know this is maybe preaching to the choir here, but it is a valuable thing for us. So, well, hey, thank you guys so much. Thank everybody here. Thank you guys online as well. I hope this has been a beneficial time. Hope it's been helpful as you process that. And anytime, I'm here. This is where I work, and I'm here a lot. So I would love for you to if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have thoughts, I would love to meet with you, help you in any way that I can. So thank you guys so much. Let me do this. Let me just pray for you. Pray for our parents of teenagers. Pray for you as church members as you serve our students in different ways and just interact with them, and for those kids in the community. I'll say this one thing. Anytime I'm out in the community and I see these large groups of teenagers, the verse that really fuels my ministry and my desire to serve this generation is, it is like sheep without a shepherd. I look and I stand in a hall change at a big high school, not right now, but other times, and I'm just looking at all of these kids. There are so many kids who are looking for purpose, looking for meaning, looking for hope, and it's sheep without a shepherd, and this church gets to be a group of shepherds to go pursue them. And so I pray that we would do that. So let me pray for us, and then we'll head out. God, we thank you so much for what you have done in this church and the ministry that we have with our students. We pray for parents right now that you would just give them wisdom and give them peace and give them comfort as they manage and as they lead and shepherd their home. I pray also for all of those in this church as they interact with students and as they see them and serve and they become a part of this church family, that they would see students and the potential that they have, and that they would love on them and encourage them and help them to know that this is a place where they are cared for and accepted. God, we thank you for just an opportunity to pour into this generation, and they have so much potential. Help us to shepherd them well, and pray for those who are lost, who don't know you and who are looking for hope and haven't been able to find it in you, and help us to be agents of grace for them. That's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys.